All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into a question that just might kind of rock your worldview.
Yeah.
Did the ancient Greeks, those pioneers of philosophy, you know the ones.
Socrates.
Yeah, Socrates, Aristotle, all those guys really come up with all their big ideas on their own?
Yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at.
Or is there more to the story?
Yeah.
Ready to find out?
Let's find out.
Okay.
I think it's really easy to assume that, Greek thought emerged, in this vacuum. Like they just, came up with everything themselves.
Yeah.
But the truth is always more complicated, isn't it?
Always more complicated.
Yeah.
And to help us uncover this intellectual puzzle, we're going to be using 3 sources today.
Okay.
So first up, we've got the Shabaka Stone.
All right.
Which is kind of like peeking into ancient Egypt's philosophical scrapbook.
Oh, cool.
Right? Yeah. It's a copy of an even older text, like think way, way back.
Wow.
And it was found in a temple dedicated to Ptah, a god so important. The Egyptians believe he basically dreamt the world into existence.
So important that he dreamt the world into existence. Wow.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a foundational god for the ancient Egyptians.
Absolutely foundational. And the Shabaka Stone lays out something called Memphite theology.
Memphite theology?
Which is like their origin story.
Okay.
But it's not just about, gods and goddesses.
Right.
It gets into the very nature of creation.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're going to jump over to Greece.
Okay.
With a critical history of Greek philosophy.
All right.
We need to know what the Greeks themselves had to say about their ideas.
Exactly. Yeah. What was their perspective
on
how their, intellectual tradition unfolded?
What was their narrative? Right.
Yeah.
So a critical history is going to be our guide.
Okay.
See if there are any hints of outside influence, particularly from the Egyptians, and then holding it all together.
Right.
Our final source is Stolen Legacy.
Stolen Legacy. Okay.
And this book makes a bold claim.
Uh-oh.
That Greek philosophy is actually borrowed.
Borrowed, interesting.
Oh, boy. This is where things get interesting.
This is where things get controversial, maybe even.
Potentially controversial, yes.
So the idea that Greek philosophy might have significant roots in Egyptian thought has been debated for centuries.
Yeah, it's a big question.
Big question.
Okay, so let's start with the Shabaka Stone.
Right.
And this Memphite theology.
Yeah.
What exactly is it all about?
Well, the Egyptians, particularly those in Memphis, believed that Ptah was the ultimate creator god, like we were saying.
Right.
He was the heart and tongue of the gods.
The heart and tongue.
Meaning thought and speech.
Okay.
Were the very foundation of existence.
Wait, so they're saying before anything even existed, there was thought.
There was thought.
Like the thought came first.
Thought precedes action.
Yeah.
That's kind of mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing, and that's exactly the fascinating part here.
Okay.
This idea of thought preceding creation, which is core to Memphite theology, echoes throughout Greek philosophy later on.
So we see this concept pop up again with the Greeks.
Yeah, we do.
That's a pretty big connection, wouldn't you say?
That is a big connection. It really is. Think of the concept of the prime mover in Greek philosophy.
Okay.
That initial force. That sets the universe in motion.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a direct one-to-one match.
Right.
But the underlying principle is strikingly similar.
Yeah.
Something has to initiate creation.
Something has to set it off.
Right.
Wow. So the idea of a prime mover, this fundamental concept in Greek philosophy, might actually have roots in Egyptian thought.
It's possible.
It challenges everything we think we know.
Well, I wouldn't say everything.
Okay.
But it certainly challenges some of our assumptions.
Our assumptions, for sure.
About the origins of these ideas.
Yeah.
So remember, we're not saying definitive proof here.
Right.
But we are exploring intriguing possibilities.
Intriguing possibilities.
Right. And what's crucial is that the Shabaka Stone gives us this incredible window into Egyptian thought.
Yeah.
A framework that we can then use to analyze Greek philosophy.
Right. It's like we've got this baseline of Egyptian thought.
Yeah.
And now we're going to kind of see how it potentially connects to Greek philosophy.
Exactly how it connects to the later Greek philosophical tradition.
Okay. I'm ready for the next piece of the puzzle.
Right.
A critical history of Greek philosophy.
A critical history. Let's do it.
What do we have here?
Well, the Greeks, they were really obsessed with understanding the universe, right? With dissecting it into its fundamental elements.
And breaking it down.
Breaking it down, exactly.
To its core components.
So think fire, water, earth, air.
The classic element?
The classic elements, exactly. They believed these building blocks held the key to the cosmos.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the Egyptians saw those elements as important too, right?
Oh, absolutely they did.
They're like woven into their myths and beliefs and stuff.
Totally. Yeah, they were everywhere in Egyptian thought, these elements.
But they approached them a little differently.
They approached them very differently.
Right.
So where the Egyptians saw these elements as divine forces imbued with the power of the gods,
Okay.
the Greeks began seeking more material, rational explanations.
So while both cultures were fascinated by the same elements,
Yes.
they took kind of different paths to understanding them.
Different paths to understanding them, and that's precisely what a critical history highlights.
Okay.
And this difference in approach, I think, is key to understanding the evolution of philosophical thought.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right.
But here's something I found really interesting.
Right.
A lot of these early Greek philosophers got in trouble for their ideas.
Yeah.
Like they were seen as dangerous, even heretical.
Right.
Why would that be if their ideas were purely Greek, like homegrown stuff?
Yeah, that is a good question.
Yeah.
So a critical history suggests that the Athenian government, which held considerable power at the time, might have perceived these new philosophical ideas as foreign.
Foreign, okay.
And, as you said, dangerous.
Dangerous.
Right.
They represented a challenge to the established order.
They did.
Okay, now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Here we go.
If these philosophical ideas were seen as foreign by the Athenians, doesn't that suggest they might have come from somewhere else?
It's possible.
Like maybe Egypt?
Like maybe Egypt, it's a compelling possibility.
Yeah.
And that's where our third source, Stolen Legacy, comes in.
All right, let's hear what Stolen Legacy has to say.
Let's bring in Stolen Legacy.
This book claims that Greek philosophy was heavily borrowed.
Borrowed, okay.
From Egyptian. Well, that's a bold statement.
It is a bold statement, yeah.
All right, so we're talking about potential intellectual appropriation here.
Yeah, it's a strong word, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the idea that the book is putting forward.
That changes how we view the whole history of philosophy.
It has the potential to do that, for sure.
If that's true, yeah. Okay, but before we, get too far ahead of ourselves.
Right.
Let's look at some specific examples from Stolen Legacy.
Okay.
And see how it supports its argument.
Let's see the receipts.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, Stolen Legacy points to Pythagoras as a prime example. You might know him for his famous theorem.
Right, Pythagoras, the triangle guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he was also a philosopher.
Oh, really?
Deeply interested in the mysteries of the soul.
I remember learning about him in, high school geometry.
Right.
But I had no idea he was into, all that philosophical stuff, too.
He was. And Stolen Legacy makes the case that his ideas about the transmigration of the soul.
Okay.
Basically, the idea that the soul is reborn into different bodies.
Reincarnation.
Aligns closely with Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So this concept that Pythagoras is, famous for might have actually originated in Egypt.
That's the argument that the book is making.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many other, quote-unquote Greek ideas might have actually come from somewhere else.
It really does. It makes you rethink, the origins of these ideas.
Totally.
And remember, we're not just talking about these abstract concepts here.
Right.
Stolen Legacy goes on to argue that even Pythagoras' mathematical principles, like the concept of harmony and proportion, might have been influenced by Egyptian knowledge.
So they were really advanced in math as well.
The ancient Egyptians had very sophisticated mathematical knowledge.
Okay, so we've got Pythagoras conscit. Who else does Stolen Legacy call out?
Well, let's move on to another big name, Socrates.
Okay.
Stolen Legacy points out that Socrates' emphasis on virtue and self-knowledge.
Yeah.
His idea that the pursuit of wisdom is essential to living a good life.
Right.
Echoes the Egyptian concept of Ma'at.
Hold on. I remember Mach Spotlight earlier.
Yeah.
It's that Egyptian idea of cosmic order and truth.
Exactly.
Right? Everything being in balance.
Yeah, it's this idea that there's a right way to live. That there's a right way to order society that's in harmony with the cosmos.
Okay.
And the similarities between Ma'at and Socrates' ethical philosophy are pretty striking, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, they do seem to kind of line up.
They do, in a lot of ways.
They do, and it's important to remember the context here.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a Greek philosopher.
Okay.
You've traveled to Egypt. You've been exposed to this incredibly rich intellectual tradition, and now you come back home.
Right.
and you want to share these ideas with your own people.
Yeah, but if they straight up said, hey, we got all this cool stuff from the Egyptians, wouldn't that have been kind of embarrassing?
It might have been seen that way.
Right. Admitting that their own culture wasn't like the ultimate source of wisdom.
Exactly. Ancient Greece was all about proving its superiority.
Yeah.
Especially against other civilizations like Egypt.
Right.
So admitting intellectual debt wouldn't have fit the narrative. So it's possible that these Greek philosophers, even if they were inspired by Egyptian thought, downplayed that influence for like political and cultural reasons.
Potentially.
It's almost like an ancient form of plagiarism.
Yeah, that's a strong word.
Okay.
But I see your point.
Yeah.
Stolen legacy certainly pushes us to consider the complexities of intellectual ownership and cultural influence.
Yeah, who gets the credit?
Yeah, who gets the credit, and how do ideas travel and transform over time?
This deep dive is like making me rethink everything I thought I knew about philosophy.
That's what we're here for.
But if stolen legacy is right, why didn't more people know about this potential Egyptian connection?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Why is this not common knowledge?
Well, for one thing, the dominant narrative of Western intellectual history has long centered on Greece as the birthplace of philosophy.
Okay.
It's a narrative that's been reinforced in textbooks, classrooms, popular culture for centuries.
So it's like a deeply ingrained bias.
It could be seen that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been taught to see Greek philosophy as this isolated phenomenon.
Yeah, as this unique product of the Greek mind.
Right. Separate from other influences.
Yeah.
And this is where stolen legacy is challenging the status quo.
It is. It's saying, hey, let's look beyond the traditional narrative.
Right.
Let's consider the possibility that the history of philosophy is more interconnected than we might think.
More nuanced.
More nuance, exactly.
Okay, so stolen legacy is basically saying, hey, let's broaden our perspective.
Yes.
Let's look beyond just the traditional narrative and consider the possibility that the history of philosophy is more interconnected than we might think.
Yes, that's a great way to summarize it.
Okay. I'm convinced stolen legacy has made a pretty compelling case.
All right.
But is there anyone who disagrees with its argument?
Of course.
Okay.
There are scholars who argue that the similarities between Egyptian and Greek thought might be more coincidental than intentional.
Okay.
So they're saying that great minds grappling with similar questions about the universe and human existence might arrive at similar conclusions independently.
So it's possible that both cultures developed these ideas on their own.
It's possible.
Without any direct borrowing.
It is possible.
Like parallel thinking.
Parallel thinking, exactly. And while it's certainly possible, it's hard to ignore the historical evidence of Greek philosophers traveling to Egypt.
Yeah, they were going there.
Immersing themselves in Egyptian knowledge and then coming back.
Right.
And developing philosophical systems that bear striking resemblances to Egyptian concepts.
Yeah, the timing seems a little too perfect to be pure coincidence.
It does raise questions.
Right.
But then again, it's impossible to prove definitively what was going on in the minds of these ancient philosophers.
Yeah, we can't go back in time and interview them.
Right. We're dealing with an incomplete historical record. And so it's all about weighing the evidence, considering different interpretations, and arriving at the most plausible explanation.
So it's not a black and white issue.
It's not.
There's room for debate and different perspectives.
Absolutely.
But even if we acknowledge the possibility of independent development, stolen legacy still raises some valid points.
It does.
About the potential for cultural exchange and influence.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think critically about the history of ideas.
Right.
And to recognize that knowledge isn't created in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's a product of complex cultural interactions and influences.
Okay, so we've explored the Shabaka Stone.
Yes.
Delved into a critical history of Greek philosophy and tackled the controversial claims of stolen legacy.
We have.
It feels like we've only scratched the surface of this topic.
We've only just begun.
What else is there to uncover?
Well, we haven't even touched upon Plato and Aristotle.
Oh, right.
Two of the most influential figures in Western philosophy.
The big guns.
The big guns, exactly. And stolen legacy makes the argument that even their work might show signs of Egyptian influence.
So there's even more to this story.
There's always more to the story.
Are you ready to delve deeper?
I'm ready, Mark.
Absolutely bring on the philosophical heavyweights.
Yeah.
I'm ready to see how far this rabbit hole goes.
All right, so let's talk about Plato, the student of Socrates,
right.
and arguably one of the most influential philosophers of all time.
Yeah, big name.
His ideas about like the ideal society, the nature of reality, those have resonated for centuries.
Plato, wasn't he the one with the allegory of the cave?
Yes, exactly.
I vaguely remember that from college.
Yeah.
Something about shadows and reality.
That's the one.
Right.
So Plato used that allegory to illustrate his theory of forms.
Forms, okay.
This idea that there's a higher realm of perfect, unchanging concepts.
Okay.
That our physical world is just a pale imitation of.
Okay. That's ringing a bell.
Yeah, it's a mind-bending concept for sure.
So how does stolen legacy connect Plato to Egyptian thought?
Oh, good question.
Did he travel to Egypt like Pythagoras?
Well, there's no definitive proof that Plato actually visited Egypt.
Okay.
Stolen legacy argues that he could have accessed Egyptian knowledge through other sources, perhaps through Greek scholars who had studied there.
Okay, so maybe like secondhand.
Yeah, exactly. Like he didn't go himself, but he learned from people who did.
Got it.
And the book points to some intriguing parallels between Plato's ideas and Egyptian thought.
Like what? Give me the juicy details.
All right, so take Plato's concept of the world soul.
Okay.
This divine force that kind of animates the entire universe.
Okay.
Stolen legacy suggests this idea might be connected to the Egyptian notion of a universal life force, often symbolized by the goddess Ma'at.
Okay, so this concept of a unifying force that like pervades everything, that's present in both Egyptian and Greek thought.
It seems to be, yeah.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's this idea that there's something more than just the material world.
Right.
Some kind of underlying principle that connects everything.
Yeah, like a deeper level of reality.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just the world soul.
Right.
Stolen legacy also draws comparisons between Plato's emphasis on the immortality of the soul.
Okay.
And Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that our souls don't just vanish after death, but continue on in some form.
Reincarnation.
Potentially, yeah. That was central to both Egyptian and Platonic thought.
Wow. So even Plato, this giant of Western philosophy, might have been influenced by ideas that originated in Egypt.
It's a possibility, and it really makes you rethink you know, how we view these figures.
Totally.
And their ideas.
This deep dive is really changing how I see the history of ideas.
That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, it's expanding my perspective for sure.
It's about expanding our perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Recognizing that intellectual innovations rarely happen in isolation.
Right, they build on what came before. And speaking of expanding perspectives, we can't leave out Aristotle, Plato's student, and another titan of philosophy.
Another giant, another heavyweight.
Right, Aristotle. He was more the science guy, right?
Yeah, he was more empirical.
Logic, observation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he was all about observation, categorization.
Right.
Trying to understand the world through systematic inquiry.
Did Stolen Legacy find connections between his work and Egyptian thought, too?
It did.
Okay.
Stolen Legacy points to Aristotle's concept of the prime mover.
Right, that concept that something had to set everything in motion.
The unmoved mover, the uncaused cause, the ultimate source of motion in the universe.
I remember that from our discussion about the Shabaka Stone.
Yeah.
And the Egyptian idea of Ta as the creator god.
Exactly. So Stolen Legacy is arguing that Aristotle's prime mover, while formulated within a Greek philosophical framework, might ultimately stem from this older Egyptian concept of a first cause, a divine being that exists outside of time and space.
So it's like these fundamental questions about the nature of reality, the origin of the universe. Those were already being explored in Egypt centuries before the Greek philosophers came along.
That's a key takeaway from this deep dive. The Greeks made incredible contributions to philosophy, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that they weren't operating in a vacuum. They inherited a rich intellectual legacy from earlier civilizations, including Egypt.
And Stolen Legacy is urging us to recognize that legacy.
Yeah.
To acknowledge the contributions of those who came before, and to see the history of ideas as a vibrant tapestry of interconnected threads.
I like that, a vibrant tapestry of interconnected threads. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's not just a straight line.
It's not a straight line. It's a web.
It's a web. It's complex.
Yeah, it's multidimensional.
This has been a mind-blowing journey.
It has.
We've gone from ancient Egyptian creation myths to the heart of Greek philosophy.
We have.
And along the way, we've challenged assumptions and uncovered hidden connections.
And I think we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
More connections to uncover, more questions to ask.
Less deep dives to do.
Exactly.
So what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I would say don't be afraid to question the dominant narratives.
Okay.
To dig deeper and to explore alternative perspectives. The history of ideas is more complex and interconnected than we often realize.
That's fantastic advice. And who knows, maybe you'll uncover the next hidden connection.
Yeah.
The next piece of the puzzle.
Maybe you'll write the next stolen legacy.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.